Welcome to Chapter 8, which is Qualitative Methods in Data Analysis. Throughout this course, you'll look into two primary ways of obtaining your data. One will be quantitative, which is more of the numbers and kind of the hard surveys, and utilizing different mathematical uh, statistics to get your data analyzed. In quantitative analysis, we look at more of an interpersonal look at it. We still may use surveys, but they're done a little differently. Primarily, we do a lot more interviewing than anything else. So, with that in mind, let's get going. So, qualitative research is more than just doing what comes naturally in social situations, which is talking. Um, Qualitative researchers must keenly observe respondents and sensitively plan their participation, systematically take notes, and strategically question respondents. You're really looking at the observing the respondents and seeing how they act within a given area, which is the human behavior, the perspectives that they're holding, and you want to look into the experiences that they've had that you're looking to measure. And then this becomes the non-numerical data. You translate their behaviors, perspectives, and experiences into data, which is the issue of reviewing their responses to questions and categorizing them into more of a scientific approach as far as the correlation of facts or feelings to facts. By doing this, what it's doing is it's giving you a lot more context of what the individual feels and how their experiences really impacted them, where they can, if you were just to go through a quantitative Likert type scale, it may not provide the depth of what that experience really all entailed. It might be just a little bit more superficial. So we look at qualitative. And like I said, this is going to be one of the two primary ways. There is a quote unquote third, which is a mixed method, which you use both. But we'll talk about that later. But looking at qualitative is in a way of connecting with your research on a more personal level. When we look at the fundamentals of this, there's three distinct research designs. Qualitative has three designs, which is the participant, the interviewing, and the focus group. The participant observation is just what it sounds like. It's a third party watching almost like from a behind a glass, two-way glass, or in nature, in a blind, where you're just looking at it. There's intensive interviewing where you are engaging one-on-one with another person with deep, thought-provoking questions, and then again with follow-up to those questions to really drill down the entire experience to get the answer. And then the last is focus groups. And we'll talk about all of these in a little bit in some depth. Qualitative research designs differ from quantitative in that qualitative research collects qualitative data. It emphasizes observations about natural behavior, any kind of artifacts that are being used, that capture social life that is experienced by the participants. You, as a researcher, do not seek to test pre-formulated hypothesis. Instead, you, as the researcher, explore what people think and how they act. They observe. These observations are then used to develop general principles or general ideas, the generalization ability of it. This method is useful for new or unstudied issues, investigating hard to study groups, or determining the meanings people give to their lives in action. It is an orientation of social context. It is interconnects between the social phenomenon rather than their discrete features. It also features or focuses on human subjectivity, on the meanings that the participants attach to certain events and that people give to their lives. So when I did mine, I was looking at graduates' interpretation of leadership training. So it was looking at the phenomenon of the increased use of quote unquote leadership training on individuals. And I looked at the graduate's perception of if it really validated the time and energy to make them, quote unquote, a better leader. The last part of why it differs is qualitative research focuses on events leading up to a particular event or outcome instead of the casual explanations of them. So when we're looking at it, we're looking at individual perspective a lot and how those things, those phenomenons, those incidences really impacted the individual. So that is different than the qualitative. The origins of this type of research developed by anthropologists and sociologists, the criminological framework required for ethnographic observations, and the netography studies on online communities. So let's delve into that. When it was developed by the anthropologists and sociologists, it laid the foundation for qualitative research by doing field research, going out and actually doing it, not in a lab, but anything like that. And it started in the early 20th century, early 1900s. When you look at, for our purposes, the criminological framework, it requires an ethnographic observation. When the anthropological field research has traditionally been ethnographic, and much criminological work shares these same characteristics. And when you look at ethnographical or ethnography, the study of culture and cultures of some group or people that share the participants' observation over an extended time. Netography studies online communities. These use ethnographic methods to study online communities, also termed cyberthenography or virtual ethnography. The netographer studies online communities and formulates exploratory research questions about social processes, like the netnographic netnographicer focuses on communities whose members share a distant or dispersed, selects community relevant to research questions, and keeps observational and reflective field notes. Now, it's a change in the traditional ways in that how technology is being utilized more and more into research, and how we as researchers have to cast a bigger net and go off more of a geographical comparison rather than just utilizing one particular area. In your readings this week, you had a lot of case studies that looked at a very different things. One of them was the case study which looked at the study of youth gangs and the field work that they took to approach that. Scholarly works investigating the life of youth gangs have relied on the use of fieldwork techniques rather than just more structured approaches offered in quantitative methods. Qualitative methods still rely on operationalizing exactly what is meant by research constructs. Decker and Van Winkle's definition of a gang. That's pretty much what we have to do first and foremost is define what were our terms. And they said that after reviewing the literature, they developed a working definition of a gang as age-graded peer groups that exhibit some performance, engages in criminal activity, and has some symbolic representation of membership. Now, this symbolization could be the clothes that they wear, the colors they wear, tattoos, um, the if some use brands, when they tag buildings and whatnot, those are things that represent who that gang particularly is. And when you look at the case study and what they were looking at, scholars scholarly works investigating the life of youth gangs have relied on the use of fieldwork techniques, meaning going out and observing and engaging with the gangs. The researchers developed definitions of that, and they looked at how when they came up with that definition, they looked at it how it can be utilized not only for what they were observing, but more unilaterally of how that definition can be translated more globally than locally. They participated in observations and in intense interviews with their focus groups and approached this research question not inductively, not deductively. First, they gathered data, then the data collection continued. They interpreted the data and developed analytical categories from which more questions were developed. That's Rios's case study on how punishment affected youth. They looked at if punishment really detoured or was it viewed as a rite of passage. Many youth gangs, that's part of it is committing some type of act. More or less, they're going to get caught. Part of gang life is to go to prison to be refined in more of their culture and more of the processes of what that life all entails. When we're talking about participant observation, it's just an ops, a method of studying things in the natural world as how they happen. Participant observation and real field research develops a sustained and intensive relationship with people while they go about their normal activities. It is a method of studying natural processes as they happen. You're just kind of seeing life happen for those individuals. As a participant or observer, you completely observe or you can covertly look at things. The term participant observer actually represents a continuum of roles ranging from being a complete observer who does not participate in a group and is publicly defined as a researcher to being a covert participant who acts just like any other group member and does not disclose his or her research. Kind of like a um, undercover work for for criminal justice, right? You want to look at or busting up a organized crime, the Donnie Brasco, right? Or if there's been times when FBI agents have gone undercover in motorcycle gangs, and they portray the gang affiliates. They go through the same type of process as any other person would because they don't know. And what they do is they make their observations on this. Now that's from a criminological respects, but we can see how if we're going to use it as a um, scientific measure, how those two are very similar. Choosing a role, balance observation with participation is key. A researcher has to be able to strike a balance between these two and needs to take a couple things into account, like the specifics of the social situation. What are we looking at? How are we going to get there? Researchers' background and personality, do they mix? Me being a very militant, uh, matter of fact type of person, I probably wouldn't do well in a gang environment. Yes, I follow the rules, but because of my personality, it may not clash. It may clash, I should say. And then you have the social political context and ethical concerns of both the participants and the ones being observed. You have complete observation, which is a role in participant observation in which the researcher does not participate in the girl, does not participate in the group activities, and is publicly defined as a researcher and has what they call a reactive effect. And this changes the individuals or group behavior that are due to being observed or otherwise studied, meaning they know that they're being studied. Um, Several chapters ago, there was we were talking about parent consent and child observations, and then the researcher was behind the glass, watching the child, um, play or do a puzzle or something like that. Now, if it was an older person in that same environment, they would know that there's someone on the other side of the glass, so they may adjust their behavior because of their know that they're being observed. We have what's called participation and observation, which is a field researcher involves active participation in observing. They're disclosing the research to the participants, has ethical advantages because group members know the researcher's real role in the group. They can choose to keep to some information or attitudes hidden, depending on what it is. This, again, has been brought out on some TV interviews. I believe Vice had one where the reporter went into the drug cartels down in South America, and everybody knew who she was, and they were fairly open. They didn't say who they were, and that was part of it. They couldn't. Their identities were hidden as well as the locations and whatnot. And some of the things that they would do, they would not allow to be filmed. They would kind of say, yeah, this isn't for you type of thing. And that goes to the part of being the hidden portion of it. The covert participation is when a researcher does not reveal his or her identity as a researcher to those who are being observed. The covert participant has adopted a role of a complete participant, kind of like what we're talking about going undercover. It lessens the potential for reactive effects and helps gain entry into inaccessible settings because you are seen as one of them. They completely bring you into the fold. There are some disadvantages. Uh, Covert participants cannot openly take notes and are obvious any obvious recording because then they're like, oh, you're an arc, right? They must write notes based on memory, and we know that sometimes even the best memories we leave things out. They cannot ask questions because that may, the certain type of questions may arouse suspicion. And in that culture, suspicion usually doesn't end well. They must keep the act up at all times. And it can be of enormous psychological strain. You forget who you are, and that's depicted in the movies quite well. You don't know who you are anymore. Um, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Wahlberg, and The Sheen. Takes place in Boston. Departed. That's a good one where you live that whole life and you start forgetting who you are. Uh, Donnie Brasco is another one because they're living it 24/7. Even though they have a family on the outside or they're doing something as for an informant, they lose track of who they are, and that's hard. Let's go with the next case study. Like I said, this chapter had a lot of case studies attached to them. They're very good, don't get me wrong. They do a really good job of relating the information. And This one talked about the researchers as soccer hooligans, which are in Europe, if you're not familiar, their football, soccer is very, it is a binding fabric that goes through the communities, and more times than not, it ends up in some way, shape, or form into some type of the chanting and whatnot gets taken too far, and there's little scuffles that happen. Well, soccer hooligans are those who are go there to um, be rowdy, to be involved in these types of things. And the person that did this Jeff Pearson, he engaged in covert participation in as an English foot soccer supporter, and commonly referred to as the hooligans. And he was not just interested in the individual and group behavior, but in police responses to the behavior as well. The researcher spent over 3 years as a part of a fan club and regularly engaged in wide range of low-level criminal offenses. The physical assaults, maybe some tagging, um, uh, going to a competitor's stadium, causing some damage there, those types of things. At the end of the research, he concluded that when the police adopt a more targeted and less confrontational approach, the risk of rioting was actually decreased. So when they were looking at people who are coming in and focused their attention on, like the picture here, on specific areas, and when they not as confrontational, just more of a something happened, you withdraw those individuals out rather than kind of a show of force type of thing. It made a difference. They talked about developing and maintaining relationships and observe the interview diverse members and make valid observations. And that's the way you really have to do. Because when you enter into that area, the critical stage of being immersed in it as a way of doing, how do you become part of it? It requires some background work. So to develop a clear understanding of what the research questions are likely to be, and to review one's personal stance towards the people and problems likely to be encountered. What are you thinking about soccer hooligans? What do you think of how law enforcement should act in a particular way? Field researchers must be very sensitive to the impressions that they make and the ties they establish when entering into this type of field, this stage of research, and because of those types of relationships, the groundwork for collecting data has to be a different perspective than just an observance portion of it. Um, Another part of this is how you in that developing relationships, researchers must manage the relationships in the setting so that they continue to observe and interview diverse members of the setting without throughout the period of the participation, and in doing so, not necessarily tipping your hand of what it is. You could have someone else do it based on your observations, have a third party do that. That's a possibility. But the thing is making valid observations will be impossible if researchers do not have the trust of the people whom they are studying. If I don't come across as being a brother of a hooligan or a gang member or something like that, if they don't really see me as being a part of it, they are not necessarily going to give me the information or engage in the activities that I really wanted to study. So we have to be um, cognizant of that when we do our portions of it. Now we're looking at the sampling events, the snowball sampling and theoretical sampling. Snowball sampling, I believe we talked about it before. Um, it's it, it's a sample component of the original participants. It's helped to uncover population, or I believe we talked about it, how it uncovered a population of men who were surrounded or involved in a crime. It slowly gets bigger and more intense with it. The theoretical sampling is drawn in sequential fashion with settings and individuals selected for a study as early observations or interviewers indicate that these settings or individuals are influential. When we're taking notes, field notes are, pretty much just jotting down data and recording it, right? There's what's being seen, what's being heard, and in a short type of note to kind of um, more jog your memory of it. Memory is okay, but we need to make sure that we have these types of field notes to get them down. Um, the procedure to jot down brief notes, called jotting, serves, like I said, as memory joggers. They don't necessarily go into big detailed stuff. It's just more of kind of a, oh yeah, that's reminds me of. It's just reminding you of what happened. And you need to transcribe that into a more comprehensive notes within a short period of time, because the longer it goes on, the more you are more apt to forget. So usually the rule of thumb is within 24 hours, after which it tends to erode and you start forgetting things. So the jottings are just brief notes, of the observations that are taken down real quickly. Field notes must be complete, detailed, and true to what is being observed and heard. Quotes should be distinguished from the researchers, observers, and phrases in their local vernacular, meaning write down exactly what they're saying, because words have different meanings in different um, sociological settings. Gangs have their own language about things. And you, as a researcher, if you want to accurately capture what is going on, you have to have a very good um, notes to say exactly what that was. Complete field notes must include descriptions of the methodology, where researchers were standing, how they chose people for conversation or observations. Well, this person was standing off to the side. They had just gotten back. They looked more approachable. They weren't looking, defensive or guarded. Those types of things. How did you choose what that was? And the last piece is the managing of personal dimensions. As a researcher, we become a part of the social situation that we're studying, and they are affected on a personal and emotional level because you get to know these people, right? Those being studied react to researchers not just as researchers, but as personal acquaintances, friends, and sometimes as personal rivals, depending on the context. In the theatrical diversions, they show how in Donnie Brasco of how they were so attached to one another. And because one brought the other in, who was an FBI agent, he stood up for him. And in standing up for him, he ended up falling down for him, because when they found out that he was an undercover cop, the guy that brought him in had to pay the price. So it's those relationships that you do. Then we have systematic observations, and this develops a standard from which variation can be recorded. Um, Systematic observation is a strategy that increases the reliability and observable data by using explicit rules and standardizing coding practices across observers. It allows systematic comparison and more confident generalizations. So when we look at the case study that they had, the systematic observations in Chicago neighborhoods, the Sampson and was it I want to say Radenbush's study. They used multiple methods of investigation. It used this method of investigation that combined observational research, survey research, and archival research to paint a more complete picture. These, as a specialty equipped sport utility vehicle was driven down the street, two video recorders taped the blocks on both sides of the street while observers peered out of their vehicle's windows and recorded the observations and logs. Kind of like when uh, back in the day when Google Maps comes by in their little cars with the camera up on top, recording everything, recording new street level views. We used to see those and mess with them all the time. But they use that for what their studies by seeing what's happening on the streets. The observers recorded codes and indicated lane use, traffic patterns, physical conditions, the evidence of physical disorder, meaning like trash on the streets, the garbage, beer bottles, graffiti, the signs of drug abuse, like the syringes, and then the social disorder, like indicating that adults just, hanging out on the corner or drinking in public, fighting, selling drugs on the corner, whatever it was. And they did this as kind of a just going through, and they used a very systematic approach because they can use it over and over and over, and no one really knew what they were doing. And it took a very snapshot in time, and they could replicate that over and over and over. In the St. Jean study, uh, Peter St. Jean advanced the research of the prior one by examining the variations in collective efficiency and community disorder and crime within a specific block in one high crime neighborhood or district in Chicago. He examined official data and compiled it with interviews taking residents where crime typically took place in the neighborhood. In process, he found pockets of crime in which most crimes weren't even reported that they occurred. He used multiple methods for this project, including resident surveys, the participant observation, the in-depth interview with the residents and offenders, and a systematic social observation. The systematic observation, when compiled with residents' own perceptions, and proved to be much greater confidence in what was being measured in the relevant neighborhood disorder. So when you're utilizing more of the what's available, you start getting a more fuller picture of what's happening. So that's why it's nice to have these types of um, processes. And it's the intensive interviewing that really kind of brings everything together. It does rely on open-ended questions, which we talked about before, some that are more than just a yes or no or a short answer. It requires more context than anything else. Because intensive interviewing relies on this type of questioning, the interviewer seeks in-depth information from the interviewer's feelings or experiences and or perceptions. It allows variation in content and questions depending on where it is, rather than asking standard questions in a fixed order, well, tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. Intensive interviewing allows the specific content in order to questions to vary from one interviewee to another, depending on their answers, their experiences, what the researcher is looking to do. It provides comprehensive picture of the interviewee. The goal of this technique is to develop a comprehensive picture of who you are interviewing, their background, their attitudes, their actions, in their own terms. How do they describe it? And the selection of new interviewers should continue until what they call a saturation point. That's the point at which the subject selection is ended in intensive interviewing, when new interviewers seem to yield little additional new information. And they kind of go through the same thing over and over and over, have the same answers. You don't need to interview every single person. It's just when you get to a point where you're not getting anything new as far as the information, you can probably move on. You've reached that saturation point. So, in instances of interviewing, you have to establish and maintain a partnership. Um, Part of it is establishing rapport with your subject. It's important to establish this by considering in advance how they will react to your interviewees or interviewers' arrangements. Interviewees should be treated definitely with respect as knowledgeable partners whose time is valuable, and a commitment to confidentiality should also be honored. We had talked about this before. When you feel more confident that you won't be targeted later, or you people understand there's no way of finding you can be a little bit more open. You need to maintain appropriate distance from the interviewer during the interview. You should maintain an appropriate distance so they don't feel like crowded in. Um, doesn't feel you don't want to violate any kind of cultural norm. Usually, sitting in a not necessarily small room, but somewhere where they feel a little bit more open. A lot of times I do mine at like coffee shops or something like that. We find a corner where there's no one around, or we'll go sit outside where there's no one there and just, have our conversation there. And it really makes a difference because there's no feeling of being captured or anything like that. When you're asking the questions, you have to encourage the subject to elaborate on answers and then record those. Interviewers should think about throughout the interview how to best achieve their objective when they're asking questions, and should actively encourage the subject to elaborate on their answers. So, those types of follow-up questions like why, or tell me about this a little bit more. What do you mean by, to really paint that picture. Um, I always use voice recording. The tape or digital recordings really are nice because they they record everything. So in case you miss it in your notes, or however you're taking notes, it really does well. I like doing the recording. That way I can pay attention to whomever I'm speaking with, and I'm not looking down. Like there's more of a relationship then. It's not just, give me what I want and that's it. You need to be open to things. You need to uh, establish that relationship, and the use of recordings helps that. Now, if you are recording, you very much need to let them know that you are recording them. Even in states that you don't need to, um, unless it is deemed like a undercover type of thing. Um, if you are looking at it from a study versus more of an investigative reporting, you need to let them know. There are barriers to reentry for older offenders, that case study, to understand the issues faced by those who are, excuse me, primarily men who are 50 and above and have been out of jail for, or I should say, in and out of jail for most of their lives. The interviewer looked at 20 20 men between 50 and older who had been released from prison from 1 year or less. The interviewer guide content open-ended question designed to solicit information about social integration and well-being, of how they are coping with being outside of prison and in society. The follow-up interviews were conducted 2 to 3 months later, so they did it pretty quick, right as they got out, and then a couple months later to see how they were adapting or changing. Um, they did this to assess any levels of hostility or mental health, because when you're coming from a prison, it's a very regulated, there's lots of rules. When you're released and it's just you, you don't have these rules anymore. How do you function? Who's going to tell you when to get up or when to eat or what to eat or where to go and what time to be there? It's very, very different, especially if that's what you really know. Uh, Researchers revealed that virtually all of the respondents had a desire to become part of the conventional society, but they all faced sustainable or substantial barriers, including disconnects from family and friends, and the inability to secure employment. That's the thing. When you've been in and out of prison and you're out, your family a lot of times are like, okay, why should we get next to you? You're kind of like tainted, or it's just going to be a matter of time before you're going to be in prison again. And if you can't find gainful employment, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to survive? What funds are you supposed to use to eat, to live, to clothe yourself? That's a problem. And a lot of times, people revert back to criminal behavior, not only to overcome that need, but the psychological portion of they can't deal with it on the outside. Then they had combining participant observation with intense interviewing. It helped uncover detailed information of how it was progressing and some of these nuances about reintegration. They talked about Susan Miller, who conducted a study on community policing, admitted that using both methodologies was vital for study results. Because when you're utilizing different approaches, it really helps with getting the information that you needed that you may not be able to get in just one little area. So we talked about intensive interviewing. Now let's talk about focus groups. And focus group is a qualitative method in which involves unrestricted group interviews in which the focus group leader actively encourages discussion amongst participants on the topic of interest. The leader begins the discussion by creating the expectation that all will participate and that the researcher will not favor any particular perspective or participant. It's just kind of it's a controlled free for all. How about that? Um, as the participant, you are meant to guide the conversation or the topics and record the data. The people are there to um, give their perspectives, their experiences, and sometimes they converse amongst themselves that uh, brings out even more information that helps. Um, it does not involve a representative sample. Focus groups do not involve don't involve this type of sample. Instead, it's a few individuals are recruited for the group who have the time to participate and who have sharing characteristics with the target population. So you're looking at a specific group, not just a swath of people. You're looking at people who can, you know, fairly be able to finish it and have something to contribute. Utilizing this helps develop hypothesis and survey questions. The focus groups can look at survey questions, investigate the meanings of the survey results. You present them and you say, okay, what does this really mean? They identify the range of opinions about an issue. Because what a focus group can do is not only give information about a particular thing, but how that thing is viewed by society. When you're getting that focus group in that lens, you are looking at getting a swath of the community that is being released in or is being taken from, and you're asking them to give their opinion of it. In the case study, it's talked about an analysis of police searches. Williams and Stahl decided to examine whether race was a determining factor in whether a driver was searched after a stop. The questions were asked: who is being searched and what are the results of the searches? They concluded that the motorist pulled over for a compliance or a courtesy stop. African Americans and Hispanic motorists were more significantly likely to be searched more compared to their white motorists. However, there's no statistical difference in the likelihood of actually finding illegal material. And the focus group with the police officers focused on determined that the perceptions about a number of issues After comparing the perceptions, attitudes, and expressions across groups and individual officers, several themes emerged. First was that drug use and sales, as well as drunk driving, were a majority of community problems. The second, that the police perception was that if you wanted to target a particular problem, you had to target a particular group. Um, Partly, so I'll go on my own experiences. If I was targeting drunk driving, I know where people tend to drive home from the bars when they're really, drunk because they think, well, I'm going to stay off the main highways because that's where the cops were. Well, that's true, but I also know the back roads, and usually I can find them a lot easier on the back roads. If I was doing drug interdiction, I would go where the crime map showed that more drugs were being bought and sold. That sometimes had a more racial bias because of where it was being done at. And if I saw a hand-to-hand transfer, I'm going to find some reason to pull over, some legal reason to pull over a vehicle, and I will do a search. Now, it was easy because with me, I ran a canine for a number of years, so it was very easy for me. One of the things that says, hey, I was did my stop, yada yada, couldn't find anything. Great, wonderful. Here's your license. You're free to leave. Take a step back. Wait a second. Do you mind? You don't have anything. You answered all my questions. I'm just trying to get my canine some work because he's pent up in the car. Would you mind if you just rolled up your windows and just let my dog go around so he can get some work and get some playtime then, and then he'll be settled down in the car. More times than I can count, people who had drugs in the car said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Especially when I said, "Close the doors, lock and close the doors, roll up the windows, just you know, just stay in your car." They're like, Shh, they won't know. I caught so many people like that. And then the focus groups were like, well, is that ethical? Is that right to do? And I was like, you're absolutely correct. They had the option of saying yes or no. They had no, I can take a dog around a car. The Supreme Court says there's no reasonable expectation of any kind of odor emitting from the car as being private, you know, as long as I wasn't making the motorist feel compelled or keeping them longer than what was supposed to be. That's what the focus group did. So it was kind of nice in that way. It really uh, helped with getting a lot of drugs off. But as you can see with the police searches of how that impacted certain areas, it does have its drawbacks and the perception of it. When we're um, analyzing the data, it involves, transcripts, notes, and pictures. Um, when we're doing this type of data collection, it's reflected in the methods that we're utilizing to do it. It focuses on text, while on quantitative data rather than on numbers. I should say qualitative does this. Quantitative is on numbers and data. Um, Qualitative data analysis is the technique in which we use to code textual, visual, and other content to explore relationship among resulting categories. That's the definition of it. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're going to formulate it into some type of measurable and recordable data, assign it to some type of methodology to where we can categorize it and um, based on that data, determine a validity of a hypothesis or not. We have progressive focusing, which is a refines focus. It's the process by which qualitative analysis interacts with the data and gradually refines to the focus. Um, the qualified data analysis, it is an art. It involves inductive and deductive processes. We talked about those before, and how the researcher generates concepts and linkages. the concepts of what we are looking to observe and the linkages between what the people are telling us to those concepts, to those hypotheses, to those um, phenomenons. And by doing that, we are able to generate a more clear picture of what's going on. Excuse me. I'm going to take a quick break here just to get some water. So hold on. Thank you. It gets talking this long kind of gets a little much, especially when you can't take a break. So look at qualitative compared with quantitative data analysis. So qualitative and analysis features certain things. The focus on meaning. What are we? We're more worried about what's happening in the phenomenon as far as the impressions versus the data, the numeristic curve. The collections much collect as much data on fewer cases because we don't have as much to the time wise, the individual wise, the cost wise. We're looking at a higher yield per individual than in quantitative. In-depth studies and attention to detail. We're looking at pre attention to detail without predetermined categories or directions, rather than emphasis on analysis and category determination in advance. We are looking at a concept of the researcher as an instrument rather than a designer of objective instruments to measure particular variables. We're sensitive to the context rather than seeking a universal generalization. Um, the attention to impact of researchers and others' values on the course of analysis rather than presuming the possibility of value-free inquiry, and a goal of rich descriptions of the world rather than measurement of specific variables. We want to see the colors, not just the outline, the black and white outlines. We want it because color gives richness and depth. That's what qualitative is, where quantitative is just the drawing on the white paper. Yes, it gives a picture of what it is, but it doesn't bring it to life. So that's why I've always been a big fan of qualitative. Um, let's see, where am I? Here. Qualitative analysis features some interesting things, the sensitivity to context rather than seeing universal generalizations, attention to the impact of researchers and others' values on the course of analysis rather than presuming the possibility of value-free inquiry, and the goals of rich descriptions rather than the measurement of specific variables. It really gives what we're looking for. So the techniques of this, the documentation. Oh, I got to get you to the same as my notes. Documentation of the data and the processes. We have to make sure that we do this and then do it in such a way that we capture everything. The categorization of data into concepts, which is the organization of the data into the concepts. The connection of the data, how the data show how one concept may influence another, the evaluating alternative explanations of collaboration or legitimizing the evaluation alternative explanations and challenging validity and searching for negative cases. And then finally, representing the account, i.e., report the findings. Reporting them, no matter what they are, is important because it, it it's important that no matter what the findings say, even though if we have a predetermined idea, the the richness of the data that's been given through the interviews and whatnot may point or paint a different picture to what we thought, and that would change things going forward. Let's see. The documentation, you got to keep track of growing volume of notes, tapes, and documents. I literally I just got rid of all mine from the last study I did. It was almost a banker's box full of stuff that I used, and it was so nice to get rid of it. It was I threw it in the burn pile because I didn't need it anymore, but it was so nice to get rid of some of that stuff. It helps develop an outline of the analytic process, absolutely, because it's a roadmap of the study, and it encourages conceptualization and strategization about the text. Uh, it gives you an idea of um, what has been done before that you can relate to in order to have your research move forward. So making sense of the conceptualization. Um, when we are looking at the coding and the categorization of it, we are looking at a meaningful interpretation of our simple observation. We ID and reference important concepts as key parts of the process. And more often, analytics insights are tested against new observations. The initial statement of problem and concepts can be most often redefined. And you, as the researcher, collects more data, interacts with the data, and the process continues. It's how, you have an idea, you look at what's done, you test it, you come out with different data, and then you base your findings on that data, and you complete the process all over again. Um, Jody Miller's study on girls and gangs provided a really good illustration of the development process and conceptualization of that topic. It illustrated a reflective nature of qualitative data connection and analysis, and it showed that researchers first was alerted to the concept by observations in the field, and then the researcher redefined her understanding of the concept by investigating the meaning. So the circle of how things approached were kept going. It was shown in this process that based on what you think, you get an answer. And then that answer is not what you think, so you go in a different direction, and now that becomes the standard. And then someone else or yourself will come by sometime later and say if that's valid or not by doing something similar. Examining the relationships and displaying data. It allows, when you're examining the relationships, it allows the researcher to move from simple descriptions and explanations into a more um, uh, detailed analysis. Um, it provides the how and the why to the what is the easiest way to doing it. The process of relating these examples can be captured in a matrix that shows the difference concepts that are connected and perhaps what causes the linkages and of the effects. Um, these matrix can be uh, graphs, can be uh, plotted on what is it called? Scattered. I'm trying to go back to my statistics days, and I can't. I'm drawing a blank. Scatter plot, plot scattered. I think that's what it's called. And it shows, the concentration in pockets. It's all about the transference of data and then the interpretation of it, because that's what we're trying to do is how are we processing the information? Then we go to the collaboration and conclusions. Data should come from a reliable source. The data should come from uh, those sources which require consideration factors like informants, the relationships with researchers, whether informant had any reason to lie. Spontaneous statements are more likely to indicate what would have been said uh, to the researcher if the researcher had been present. Um, Relative Reactivity to being observed can be assessed if the researcher carefully compares what the informant says, happens when the researcher is not present, and then what the researcher directly sees. So that has a big area to it. Research conclusions. That's a qualitative researcher should be assessed by their ability to provide a credible explanation of some aspect of social life. The explanation should capture group members' tactic knowledge. Tactic knowledge is a credible sense of understanding of a social process that reflects the researcher's awareness to participant actions, as well as their own words, and what they fail to state or feel deeply about or even take for granted. The reflectivity is how the qualitative researcher that describes the natural history um, of the development of evidence that enables others to more adequately evaluate findings. So by utilizing these areas of how are we going to get to our conclusion by utilizing different methodologies and placing them out there as far as these are what they are. This is what happens when I'm there. This is what happens if I wasn't there, type of thing. Factors that affect choice of research. Research questions under investigation really determine what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. A researcher's preference for experiences. Maybe you don't want to go undercover and really uh, ex experience what the others are. Maybe it might be just dangerous, working with gangs or something like that. You may be able to um, maybe you feel real comfortable as that disinterested third party where you're just doing a clear observation and they don't know about it. Maybe that's it. I don't know. It's up to you. There's a thing called grounded based on observations. That's the grounded theory. The goal of many qualitative researchers is to create grounded theory, that is, to inductively build a systematic theory that is grounded in or based on the observations. Um, it, it's general explanation that develops in interaction with the data and is continually tested and refined as data collection continues. The observations are summarized into conceptual categories, which are tested directly in the research setting with more observations. So even in this portion of it, we are guided by theories. Then there's the computer aided uh, qualitative data analysis. It just uses a special computer software to assess the analysis through creating and applying different refining categories, track linkages between concepts, and making comparison between cases and events. The QSD, which is the uh, what is it? Qualitative. I can't remember. Anywho, um, it helps through pictorial data. It creates a scans text in a word processor. It creates and imports the text files, word files, or even videos in a narrative material. It terms the research in Nvido. Data is imported directly into Nvido, and the data cannot be imported while it's still being created summaries of the content. I've never used this. My research doesn't allow for it, but that's okay. If yours is, I am not that. Uh, Everything that I look at usually doesn't require to use that type of equipment. Not to say I wouldn't be interested in learning about it. I just never had the opportunity or the need to. Um, Alternatives in qualitative data analysis. They talked about the case study from crime and substance abuse. The researcher project examines the factors related to dissidence for a sample of drug-involved offenders. Um, the intensive interviews was with over 300 individuals, and it involved intense open-ended questions. Um, with those originally released from prison in the early 1990s, with the goal of the interview to uncover storylines. Storylines are temporarily limited, interacted sets of events and conditions that increase the likelihood that individuals will engage in crime. The coding process developed categories from existing literature, began with the list of initial categories developed from these literature on dissidents. The researcher coded the same transcripts and discussed their coding strategies in group settings. The information utilized at Navido, after all the interviews were coded, Navido performed analysis by reviewing all interview narratives and how it had been decoded. Again, I've never used it. I guess mine was just my field of research just didn't require it. I didn't have the need for it. I think it has a wonderful place. It crunches down the time immensely, and that's part of it. By doing studies, you are the majority of your time is data collection and data analysis. Is by far that's 80-90% of any research project. Then the ethical issues. We need to have voluntary participation. A point of contention in participant observation is interpreting the standard of voluntarism. It's difficult. Therefore, the IRBs of most universities mostly don't condone covert participation. In field research, it would be impossible if the participant observer were required to request permission of anyone having some contact. The people that were driving in the van down the streets, how would you be able to contact every single person that you recorded for that? It would be really difficult. Consent limits participate observations research only in the settings without serious conflicts of interest. Important when interviewing prisoners and children that we are not necessarily so that the parents of it and then our understanding of what's going on with the children and the inmates so that they know they're not going to receive anything for this. It's just merely if they want to do it. So that they don't that the guardians don't want to be uncovered. Um, it may lead to other things like neglect or something like that. So, they may not want that. So they want to be sure that they're very forthright. Subject well-being, avoid direct harm with participants. I mean, that's kind of a given. We saw in the very early chapters of this book about um, the issues with the Stanford jail experiment and how long-lasting that could be and how much harm can happen. So, and then some of the other things that have gone on, like the Tuskegee syphilis and how that's long lasting and even in death. So you need to ensure that you avoid harm for your people. Uh, Identity disclosures determine how much disclosure is required, the extent to which the study purpose is understood, the extent to which informed consent can be made, and you need to strike a balance between disclosure of critical facts and coherent research strategy, the confidentiality, the importance of uncovering deviant behavior. When you do find it, what are you going to do? You're caught in something. So if you learn about a crime, you have to be careful that are you honor bound to report such things to the authorities or abuse or anything like that? Um, how are you going to um, address that? Maybe it's beyond the statute of limitations and the interviewee had engaged in some really disturbing behavior. How is that going to impact you as the researcher? Does it put any kind of bias then on you? You expunge identifying material. Obviously, you want to keep the confidentiality. Um, I always like I said, I've used the names. I can associate like particular names or numbers. One of the thing that I did was I utilized the I made groups, group A, group B, group C, and everybody in each particular group had a name, a fictitious name that started with the letter of that group. Andy, Aaron, Amy, Alicia, whatever it was. It wasn't their name, but it was a name that I would call them or refer to them in the study, and I would make that known. And then Bob or Bernadette or Bernard for B, and so on and so on. So that way I maintain that confidentiality and alter unimportant aspects of the description. Um, I just never use them. I guess that would be alter unimportant. I didn't use a lot of I use some demographic data, not too much like where they were, stuff like that, other than generalization. So um, the whole aspect of confidentiality is so that anyone, even a person that knew someone that was involved in the study who looked at it, wouldn't be able to tell who it was. Um, let's see, the appropriate boundaries. We need to know as researchers, we need to build a rapport, but maintain boundaries. We need to have them feel comfortable with us, but know that we are a true third party. We want to stay away. Think of it like a therapist or a teacher. You want to be encouraging, but you want to have that professional delineation between each ones. Um, the researcher's safety, evaluate the potential risk. You know, if you're doing violent offenders in jail or in prisons, how are you going to um, protect them? Um, if you're studying crime or anything else, you should not begin until potential risks to the researcher safety had been evaluated. Are you going to interview them and they're going to be shackled? Are they going to be behind glass? Are they going to be on a phone? How are you protecting everybody involved? Researchers should design and consider safety needs as far as the time of designing the research and not as an afterthought upon, like, okay, um, we need to really think about it before we engage, before we get there asking, oh, can we just do it in a day room? Can we do it in the visiting room? Because even in some maximum security, visiting rooms are not, they're big day rooms with tables and chairs. So, it could be dangerous depending on how everything is laid out. So you need to make sure that you are thinking about it before you even get there. It's in the organization plans for it. Ownership of field notes and analysis. Once the field research is complete, the most important question is how are you going to what are you possessing? How are you going to take ownership of the field notes? How are you going to analyze it? Conflicts of interest between different stakeholders, the intimate involvement of the qualitative researcher with participants in a study makes conflicts of interest between different stakeholders much more difficult to resolve because people want certain things. They want information, they want um, uh, to know what happened. What if you're doing a with inmates and you find out more about what happened in the case? Do you give that to the authorities? Do you give that to the family? There are different things. You need to develop understandings with the stakeholders to avoid any hassles, develop understandings early in the project with all the major participants and stakeholders to specify what actions will be taken to encourage appropriate use of project results and to respond to what has been considered misuse of these results. Is everything going to be confidential? Everything is going to be locked away even if you come across some of those ethical dilemmas, those types of things are um, very real. With qualitative data, um, I like it better because it paints a much richer, deeper picture than just data, just numbers. And then you can extrapolate a picture from that numbers. I like meanings more than just generalizations. So that takes care of qualitative data for today. And next time we will be on for our next chapter, which should be chapter 8. Until then, talk at you.